Good evening. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for coming. This program is sponsored by Rabbi Roll, and the interest over here is that we should become familiar with Perek Eilu Metzios. It's a common perek that's learned in many schools with middle school age boys, and it's a terrific perek. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein said that the reason why it is that we like learning with boys, their first touch of Gemara is usually in either Bava Metzia, such as this case, or Perek HaMafkid, which is also Bava Metzia, Bava Kama. Why do we choose those things? Why don't we learn something a little more, easy? Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. So the reason why we pick something like this is because Rav Moshe said that you want to teach boys the importance of other people's property. And that's what this is all about. That you find something and you have to try as much as you can to return it to its owner if it's possible. That's what this perek is all about. And we're interested in learning how to do this for two reasons. Number one, because if you learn how to learn this Gemara, you'll be able to learn all the rest of the Gemaras, because the way it works in the Talmud is that once you can learn one Gemara, you can start learning other Gemaras, because the language is similar and the thought processes are similar. And if you can learn how to learn Gemara here, you can learn how to learn Gemara elsewhere, and you can eventually learn how to master Shas. That's one. But there's a second goal in this case, and that is that you want to be able, on the short term, you want to be able to learn. There's a lot of fathers out there who have children going through the middle school, and they come to Gemara, and then the father feels like, oh my gosh, this is over my head. Right? Like, I'm going to help my kid learn and keep up with class. I can't help him in the homework. This is beyond my scope, and what am I supposed to do? So that's what this is about. This is the other goal, and that is that we want to make it that parents would be able, or grandparents would be able to learn with their children, grandchildren, and be able to feel that it's not only not beyond them, but they can be aids and help and be very active participants in their children's chinuch. And that's a wonderful thing. As far as this program is concerned, it has two parts. It actually has three parts. The one part is the formatted Gemara, which you have all been given out. That formatted Gemara is very user-friendly. It knocks it down into small pieces, and it highlights each step of the Gemara, makes it easier to learn. And then there's the workbook. Now the workbook is intended to help through getting everything that you need to know in this material. It comes with a word list, it comes with an introduction, and it has various exercises to be able to hone the material and make sure you understand it. I strongly recommend that you take a look at this outside of this class. The more you work on it outside in your own time, the more you will get. Of course, you'll get something when you go through the class just once a week for an hour, but the real advantage of this is when you work on it yourself and you go through the exercises, you really get it down, you really understand it, and optimally, the goal would be that you should be able to pull out a regular Vilna edition Gemara and read it inside there to the point where you have it mastered, and then you're really cooking. And you could really do that for every Sugya, take a little bit at a time, work it through, master it, get it straight, and be able to read it inside of your regular Vilna edition Gemara, and you will find that the Vilna edition Gemara, which used to look like this great big bad wolf that you don't understand what it is, it really isn't that bad at all. It's really a nice place to be, but I understand why it could be overwhelming to someone who really has never really gotten the hang of it. I can understand that. So that's what we're here for, to try to ease that transition into regular learning, and hopefully we'll make it. So let's start. Okay, the first Mishna of Eilu Metzios starts with sort of a question. It says it in a funny way though. Eilu Metzios Shalom. Metzios means what? Or found objects, right? Found objects. These Eilu Metzios, these found objects are Shalom, are his, which means he can keep them. The Eilu, and these, Chayav La'achris. And these, he is Chayav, he's obligated. La'achris means to announce, right, to announce them. Meaning, he is going to be obligated to announce them to be able to try to return it to their proper owner. Who's ever lost it should be able to retrieve it. And it is an obligation on the finder to try to aid the one who lost it, its real owner, to be able to find it. That's a halacha in the Torah. The Torah says that when you find, it's a pasuk in Parshas Kiseitze, that when you find something that was lost of your friend, the halacha is lo sisalem, right? You're not allowed to just ignore it. You're not allowed to just say, tough. No, you're not allowed to do that. Lo suchal yisalem, you're not allowed to do that. But rather, hashev teshivem le'achicha, you're supposed to return them to your brother. You're supposed to return it to the person to whom it belongs. So the Mishnah is starting out by saying, these are the found objects which he can keep, and these are the ones that he is obligated to announce. Now you can either put a period at the end of that statement or put a question mark. I chose to put a question mark. The reason why I did that is because that really it's a question. It's really which ones are which. You find a lost object. Which kind of lost objects are you obligated to return, and which ones may you keep for yourself? So that's the Mishnah. That's the Mishnah's posed the question, although it's in it doesn't state it in a question form as is usual, but that's what it means. It means a question. Which ones are these found objects that you can keep, and which ones are you obligated to announce and to try to return to the owner? So the first Mishnah over here says, this is the opening Mishnah in Perek Eilu Metzios, Eilu Metzios Shalom. These following are the found objects which are his. Namely, he can keep them. Now, before I go on, let me just explain something about this Mishnah, which is worthwhile to know. This Mishnah and the next Mishnah, which comes a few blot from here, but if you're learning Mishnayos, you would see it right next to it. The next Mishnah starts off with the Eilu Chayav La'achriz. If you look a few blot, if you have a real Gemara, you have a few blot later, you'll see the next Mishnah says, and these he is Chayav to announce. Because this Mishnah is going to be what they call the Reisha, the first Mishnah. This Mishnah gives the listing on the ones that you are obligated to, you're allowed to keep. Eilu Metzios Shalom. And the sister Mishnah, which is the next one, is going to be the rejoinder, which you're going to say, and these Chayav L'Hachriz. These ones you're obligated to announce. And for some reason, which I'm really not 100% clear on myself, admittedly, for some reason, the Mishnah chose not to give general rules. I don't know why, quite frankly, but the Mishnah chooses always to give particular cases, and you have to derive the rule from the particular cases. Now, in each one of these particular cases, there is something specific why that case was chosen. It wasn't just random, as we'll see in the Gemara, that the Gemara mentions that there's a particular interest in each one of these cases, why it is that the Mishnah chose it. But the Mishnah did not give a sweeping general rule. Now, if you look in the Rambam, for example, the Rambam is the master of giving the rules, right? So if you look at the Rambam and how he says it, he'll give you a general rule on how to go by it. But the Mishnah doesn't speak like that. I don't know why. And the Mishnah gives specific examples. So let's go through the examples and let's see if we can derive the rule. Okay. So Eilu Metzios, these are the found objects which are his. Number 1. Matzah, peros, mefuzarin. Help me out. Matzah. Found. Peros, mefuzarin. Fruits, by the way, fruits do not mean necessarily a fruit in the way that we're used to, like a fruit versus a vegetable. Over here it just means produce. Produce of any kind. Matzah, peros, if he finds fruits or produce, mefuzarin. What does that mean? Scattered. Good. Scattered. Scattered fruits. Scattered produce. Apparently you're allowed to keep that. Now obviously there's something about the scattered part, right? It's not because that the produce, it's obviously something about the scattered. The Gemara is going to talk about it. Ma'os mefuzaros. What does that mean? Good. Ma'os means money or coins. Scattered coins. Scattered money. You're allowed to keep that too. Okay? Again, obviously there's something about the fact that they're scattered. Were they not to be scattered? Were they to be neatly piled or something like that? Evidently that you would not be allowed to keep, right? Because evidently that would be some sort of sign of ownership or that it wasn't forgotten. Now that's an important point. So far we've found that we're talking about scattered things, which means that evidently it was lost. It was something that the owner did not intentionally place there. Because if they were intentionally placed, they wouldn't be scattered helter-skelter, right? They would be put in some sort of nice way, right? Stacked in some sort of organized fashion. The fact that it's not is the proof that this must have been forgotten, must have been lost, and now it becomes a metzia. It becomes something that you can keep. Okay. Next example. Krichos b'rishus harabim. What is that? Bundles in a public area. Bundles. Okay? That refers to bundles of wheat, let's say. In the old days, before carbine harvesters, what they used to do is they used to have farmhands. And in the old days, they used to reap the harvest, right? Used to go in with an arm, with a sickle, and cut it down, make little bundles, and that's how they would harvest the field. That's the old style. That's the way they did it, for thousands of years. That's the way they always did it. So if you find those kind of bundles, but you find them where? In Rishus Harabim. In a public area. Okay? Evidently that if it's in a private area, then you can't touch them, right? Because that would be a surefire sign that they belong to whomever the field belongs to, right? But if they're in the public area, well, why would somebody leave something like that in a public area? Obviously, it dropped off the horse or whatever it is, and it must have been lost. Okay, so that you're allowed to do. Next, v'igule dvela. Okay, that is a hard one to explain without some background. The old days, what they used to do is, and I only know this because Rashi told me, and I run into this from time to time. Igule dvela was like this. In the old days, what they used to do with figs, for those of you who are familiar with figs, you would know that figs, they're very soft, very sweet when they're fresh, but they don't last that long. So what they do is that, especially in Israel, they dry them. They cut them open and they dry them in the Mediterranean sun in the summer. And that way it takes out all of their moisture, and they're good to they're dried fruits, and now they will last for a long time. What they used to do is they used to make them into rounds. That's the way they used to do it, like big pizzas. Rounds of figs. And they used to put them into these shapes, and that's how they were sold. Rounds of figs. And that's what they're translating as, igule dvela, rounds of figs. Now those rounds of figs, you can buy them, they're all like that. They all look the same. They're all exactly like that, right? There's no particular marking on any of them. So it becomes something which, if you lose it, there's no way to identify yours. So you're allowed to keep it. The finder's allowed to keep it. Next, kikaros shel nachtom. What's that? Kikaros are
loaves.
Good, very good. Loaves of a baker.
I was confused because I thought a kikar was a square.
A kikar in modern Hebrew can be a square, meaning, like a square of streets. Yeah. Kikar, yes, it can be. But kikaros, a kikar also in Old Hebrew, a kikar, it can mean a loaf. A loaf of a baker. Now obviously that means a loaf, right? A loaf of a baker as opposed to? Oh, good, exactly. As opposed to a privately made. So a baker can make dozens and dozens of challahs and they all look the same, right? Makes dozens of cookies and they all look the same, right? But we all know that that's not true of, those of you who have ever had like home-baked challah, they know that every single challah comes out different, right? The same lady makes a home-baked challah, the one that's on this side of the oven comes out different than the one that's on that side of the oven. That's the way it is, right? So those are much more individualized. And therefore, a baker's loaf does not have a telltale sign, a siman. Okay? Machrozos shel dogim literally means strings of fish, strings of caught fish. Now we're talking about over there that there's again no telltale sign. V'chatichos shel basar, and pieces of meat. Those have no telltale sign. Now I'm going to pause here for a minute. Are we picking up from all of these individual cases? Are we picking up any kind of rules? What's coming out from all this? Let's go through a little bit. We'll pause here for a minute and let's just catch up. Okay. One of the rules that we said was that it can't be stacked, right? Mefuzar, supposed to be spread. So if you find spread produce or you find spread money, spread out, okay? That's a sign that it's lost. Good? So the first thing is that we have to ascertain is this thing lost? Okay? If it was placed here intentionally and thus not lost, now, let me make a note here. If it was placed here, it may not have been such a bright idea to do that. The owner may have been naive into thinking, I'll put it over here and I'll come back in a half an hour and assume that it'll still be there and nobody's going to swipe it. Okay? Maybe that's a bit naive, especially in our day and age, that somebody would leave something in a place where people can take it. But that notwithstanding, forget about how naive he is. Was it placed here? If it was placed here, it's not necessarily lost. It was intentionally placed. If it was intentionally placed, I can't touch it. It's not a lost object, right? So the first rule of thumb that you see from the first examples of the Mishnah is you have to have something which shows you that this was lost, that this is something which was not intentionally placed here, i.e. scattered. If it was scattered, so then obviously this person did not intentionally place it here. It must have fallen out of his hands or off the wagon or something like that, and somehow it got strewn here, and that's why it is lost object. Oh, okay. But the first rule is it has to be that something the person lost it. Otherwise, if the person placed it here intentionally, it's not lost. He intends on coming back. I'm not allowed to touch it. If anything, that would be harmful to the owner, because I'm taking it from the place where he's expecting to come back. He may have just, went to the bathroom or something like that, placed it down here. 5 minutes from now, he's going to come back, and it's gone, and now it's going to be a big hassle for him to find it. He expected it to be here. So I'm not allowed to touch it if it was intentionally placed. Let's go on. What about krichos b'rshus harabim? Now that's going to be an example of, obviously, what?
Not caring, like have careless.
Okay, it's obviously something which is not, you wouldn't place it here, right? It's out there, out in the middle of a reshus harabim. It is almost definite that it fell there, because nobody would put a bundle of wheat in the middle of a public thoroughfare. You're going to put it in the middle of Park Heights Avenue? What are you, crazy? That's not where you put a bundle of wheat. You wouldn't do that. Okay? Those are examples of things which are clearly lost, clearly not intentionally placed there. Okay? Now the other examples also have to fall in line, but the other examples are honing in on a different aspect, and that is, yes?
Well, how do we know that, when I encounter the fruits in this status or the coins, that, someone 2 minutes ago didn't kick it aside, but it actually had been placed there by the...
Okay, that's a very good question. That's a very good question. You have to go with what is most likely, right? Your most likely scenario. If it is that someone accidentally kicked it, or it was in a place where people would accidentally kick it, most likely, so then it would probably be an aveda. It would be a lost object. If it's in a place where it would probably not be kicked, such as in a private property or something like that, where the person could realistically think that this is going to come, it's still going to be here like I stacked it up, in 15 minutes from now or something like that, right? It's reasonable to assume that it's going to stay the same way, so then it becomes something which I have to suspect that it was placed there intentionally. Okay, at the Gemara, when we go through the Gemara, some of these rules are going to get a little more defined. Now, the rest of the cases that we listed, rounds of figs, baker's loaves, strings of fish, pieces of meat, all of those are things which ein lohem siman. They do not have a sign. A siman is defined by something which is an identifiable mark. It does not have to be your name. And there are different levels of siman. There's a siman which is known as a siman muvak. A siman muvak means a surefire siman, a absolute siman, such as a basketball that says Englander on it. Okay? That's a good siman, right? Obviously, that's very clear siman, right? You wrote that down on the basketball so that people will see that, especially if it has a phone number on it or something like that, right? Obviously, that's a siman. But it doesn't have to be that clear. It doesn't have to be a siman muvak. It can mean any type of siman which would be unique enough that I would be able to identify it, because that it has something unusual about it, something identifiable. Rounds of figs, they make thousands of these. It's like finding a Bic pen. Okay? They make hundreds of thousands of these, millions of these things. We used to have a game in yeshiva, when we all used to have cheap Bic pens. And the contest was who could actually keep their Bic pen long enough to run it out of ink. Right? That before it got lost. Right? It wasn't easy. Right? Now, some guys cheated and they pulled off the back top and they stuck a little piece of paper on it with their name. And then they restopped the back, right? Okay, that was cheating. Not really cheating. Hopefully you cut. Even then, you probably lost it. But certainly, to keep it without a name, there were dozens of pens hanging around yeshiva that had no name, and God knows whose they were, right? For all I know, it could have been a guy who left the yeshiva 4 years ago and never claimed the pen. How am I supposed to know? There's no way to know. You can keep those because those have no siman, unless they were placed there intentionally, right? You have to know what's going on. Okay. In any case.
But does every bocher put down their pen intentionally?
No, because sometimes you find them on the grass. Sometimes they slip out of a pocket. Sometimes they fall on the floor. Even if they were on the table, but they fell on the floor, and now what am I supposed to do? Right? It wasn't intention. Nobody intentionally put it on the floor. So now it's an aveda. Okay, so the rest of those examples are things that have no siman, no telltale identifying sign. And that's the reason why you can keep them. And this brings us to the concept of siman and what we know as yiyush. Yiyush means that the owners give up hope, and once they give up hope, our Gemara is going to assume that it is hefker. Hefker means ownerless. And once the owners give up hope for ever getting their thing back, because their Bic pen is now gone and I have no way of identifying it, how am I supposed to tell you that this is my pen as opposed to the other 500 Bic pens that are out there, right? So I've given up hope. At that point, it becomes ownerless. Our Gemara is assuming it becomes ownerless, and I'm allowed to keep it. Now, I'll mention, this is a little beyond the scope of this class, there is discussion amongst the Mefarshim about that. There's a lot of talk amongst the Rishonim and Achronim, later commentaries as to, well, what made it hefker? Ordinarily, if you know that when we need to be mafker something, we need to be mafker it in a more official manner. You have to state that it's hefker. You have to do it in front of a beis din. So you actually have to relinquish ownership in a formal way. So the question that the Mefarshim are very bothered by, which is a lot of discussion amongst the Mefarshim, is that it seems from this whole perek that isn't so, that you can own something, and then because you drop it and there's no way of you getting it back, you give up hope, and that automatically makes it ownerless. And then the finder can keep it. Now, 1 second, but the guy didn't formally give up hope on it, formally mafker it. Why is it that all of a sudden kicks in as to make it ownerless? That's not so simple. But our whole Gemara assumes that you can do that. The Mefarshim, the Achronim, talk about this in more great length, why it works. Okay? It's a little bit beyond the scope of what we're trying to do here, but it is a big discussion. Let's press on. The Gizei Tzemer shearings of wool. Halakuchen mimidinasan, which are literally means bought. Lakuchen means taken or bought. Mimidinasan, from their country or county. Now let me explain this. There are a lot of boys who have no idea what this means. They just translate these words literally and they don't know what it means. It's really very simple. But it helps if you've ever gone to a county fair. And if you've ever gone to a county fair, you know what this is. Did you ever go to a place where you saw a sheep being sheared? No? Okay. Well, I have. All they did is they take, nowadays they use electric razors. In the old days, they used to use the old-fashioned big scissors, right? And you just shear off the fleece, the wool, off of a sheep, off of a lamb, and it just flops all over the floor, right? Okay? Nowadays, they can have these guys who are good at it, they can shear an entire sheep. It goes from big, heavy woolen thing, and it can go to a 000 in 2.5 minutes, right? The whole sheep is sheared completely, okay? It's amazing. Now, all of this wool just falls to the ground, okay? What do afterwards? You got all sorts of gizeh tzemer, cut wool. Where does it go? Falls to the floor. What do they do with it? So obviously afterwards, they just simply come, take a broom or something like that, sweep it up, and bag it. Okay? That's what that is. That's what this is. Gizeh tzemer, halakuchen mimidinazan. That means that they were not processed yet. Just plain, simple shearings of wool, basically straight off the sheep's back. Halakuchen mimidinasan means that they're taken from the county, means that they have not been processed, right? And therefore they are completely unmarked, generally. Now, of course, if you find a bag and the shearings are in the bag and the bag is tagged, that's not gizeh tzemer halakuchen mimidinasan. You're not finding shearings of wool. Well, yeah, sure you do. But you found a bag, and the bag is marked. So obviously that's not what this is referring to. This is referring to before. It's not bagged. You're finding loose shearings that were not collected. These have no siman, because it's straight off of the sheep's back. How are you supposed to know which kind of wool is that? Next, anitze pishton, literally translated balls of flax. Again, here's another example. What do you think they do? In the old days, they went out. Back in the old days, they used to pick cotton and they used to pick flax, right? They used to have the workers go out in the flax fields and pick out the flax. And when you go out and you find these loose strands of balls of flax, you can keep them. There's no way to identify them. Next, ulashonos shel argaman, and literally means strips, lashonos from the term of a tongue, which I guess is in the shape of a strip. Strip of argaman. Argaman is purple wool. Now, why he picks on argaman, purple wool, as opposed to blue wool, as opposed to red wool, as opposed to any other color wool? It was just a common way of processing wool. Okay? And because it was common to do that, and they used to dye the wool that way, it has no siman, because they do this by the thousands. And therefore, there's no siman on it. They used to make, just sort of like strips of these wools, and that's how they used to do it. In the old days, you could still go into some of these places, and they have rolls of fabric. That's what this is. Basically a roll of fabric in a certain color. It's unidentified. Now, all of those, Hare Eilu Shelo, all of these you are allowed, Hare Eilu Shelo. Behold, these are his. Any of the above, you find them, you're allowed to keep them. Divrei Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. Pause. These are the words of Rabbi Meir, huh? What does that imply? Thank you. That's exactly right. Someone else has a different opinion about this, right? These are only the words of Rabbi Meir. Aha, very good. Aaron, you're thinking like the Gemara does. Because the Gemara picks up on that very quickly and says, oh, somebody argues, eh? Exactly what are we arguing about? Right? Because, I mean, you got a point. Rabbi Meir has a point. If there's no siman, how are you supposed to argue about this, right? So the Gemara is going to pick up on this. Oh, Dibur Rabbi Meir. Okay, somebody is arguing on this because the Mishnah would not have said Dibur Rabbi Meir if it was a universally accepted opinion, right? Okay. Good. Let's hold. Rashi will, Rashi often says, when you get to a point in the Mishnah, Rashi will say, I didn't put in the Rashis yet, but Rashi often says, the Gemara Mefarish. The Gemara will say, which basically is like saying, Englander, I know that you are going to look at this and you're going to get a question mark, and you're going to say, that's interesting. So Rashi says, hold your chops. I know. The Gemara is going to talk about it. Be patient. You're not the first person who noticed that, right? Right? Don't worry, we'll get there. But a little patience. Next. Now Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kol sheyesh bo shinui. Help me out, what does that mean?
Everything that has a
Change.
Good.
Situation.
Right. Anything which has in it a change. Something which is unusual. Shinui. It's something which is changed. Chayav lahachros. You're obligated to announce. If something is odd about it. Okay. So he gives an example. Keitzad. How is that? So Rabbi Yehuda is going to give us an example or two of something which is unusual. For example, Motza Igul, if he finds a eagle, that's an eagle dvela, right? A round of figs. He found one, uvesocho cheres, and inside of it is cheres. What's cheres?
Sure.
Good, exactly. A shard of pottery. Okay? Clay. That's what it is. It's inside the eagle. Now, obviously, that's a strange thing, right? That would be odd. Nobody wants to put a piece of pottery inside of their food, right? So that's a simon. Okay. Or an example, second example, kikar. Again, what is kikar? A loaf of bread, let's say. Uvisocho, and inside it is mos. Money, some coins. Oh, okay. Now, those are clearly unusual. Because how many people put in money inside of their loaves of bread? Not too many. How many people put in pieces of shards of pottery inside of their rounds of figs? Not too many. So therefore, that's a siman, right? That's something which is unusual, and says Rabbi Yehuda, that is a siman, and you are obligated to announce that. Now, a few things come to mind which should be asked right here, and the Gemara will discuss it. First of all, what is he talking about? Did he put these in intentionally? Or did they somehow accidentally fall in?
Most likely intentional.
Well, okay. Okay. let me ask you another question, which is going to be relevant to the first question. Rabbi Yehuda says, anything which has something which is unusual about it, you're obligated to announce it. What does that imply? Rabbi Yehuda said that.
The mayor disagrees.
Oh, thank you. Evidently that means that that's not universally accepted. Again, the Mishnah would not have said it as Rabbi Yehuda said that. If everybody agreed, the Mishnah would have just said it as ipso facto, right? Well, it didn't. It said Rabbi Yehuda happens to hold this way, right? Oh, that's a dead giveaway that not everybody agrees, right? Well, why are they disagreeing? Doesn't make sense? I mean, he does have a good point, does he not? It is kind of unusual that you would have a bread with coins in it, or a round of fig with pottery in it, right? Admittedly, that's kind of odd, right? I don't think anybody would argue on that part, right? So, why is there a point of distinction, of disagreement here? What are they arguing over? Now, of course, that's going to play into the first question of, well, what's the case? Did this fall in intentionally? Did it fall in unintentionally? Right? What are we talking about? So we have to do some analysis here, okay? And that is exactly what the Gemara does. The Gemara is the ultimate analyzer of the Mishnah, right? Nothing in the Mishnah goes by without the Gemara picking up on it. And you can almost promise yourself, you can almost guarantee, money back guarantee, that if the Mishnah says something which is even the slightest bit vague, you can be certain that the Gemara is going to hone in on it and say, oh, well, no, let's talk about that. I'm not so sure about what this means. Let's discuss this. Okay? Yeah, because the Gemara does not let the Mishnah go, right? The Gemara analyzes every nook and cranny of the Mishnah. The Gemara does that very professionally. It does that a lot. As a matter of fact, that's the whole point of the Gemara, to do that. Okay. So we're going to leave that as another question mark. So we already have a couple of question marks. We're not sure exactly why the first part was Divrei Rebbe Meir. What's the point of contention there? We're not 100% sure of what the point of contention over Rabbi Yehuda's statement also, right? Good. We're going to have to discuss that. Now we're going to have Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer. Last point the Mishnah brings is Reb Shimon ben Elazar says, Kol klei anpuria ein chayav lahachras. All vessels of anpuria. All right. Now that's a good one. What does that mean? That's a very uncommon word, anpuria.
Porcelain?
Oh, good guess. Okay. No, I don't think so. Yes. New. Okay. It happens to be that Rashi, because as I joke often, I say, Rashi was sitting there, and when he was reading this, he says, I know what's going to happen. Englander is going to read this, and he's going to say, huh? So Rashi was right there, and he said, I'll help you. Englander, I'll help you. Don't worry, I'll help you out. Okay, now, in the format of Gemara, I didn't get to the Rashis quite yet. We'll get to the Rashis in a little bit, about a blot in. But it means new vessels. As it were, in our day and age, it means still in the box. Right? That is fresh, spanking new, straight from the store. Any clay anpuria, vessels which are mamish new, you're not obligated to announce. Now, why would that be? Why would you not be obligated to announce if you found those? Presumably because.
They all look the same?
Exactly. They all look the same. Right? You go into the store and, you look for, whatever item there is, and there's 25 of them in the store, right? Well, Maybe right now the shortage a little bit. But normally speaking, you go into Target, right? And you're going to have, 25 of these items are sitting there right there on the shelf, right? And they all look exactly the same. Okay, maybe one's this manufacturer, one's this manufacturer. Okay, whatever. But basically, you got a whole bunch of them. So, called Klean Puria, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, if it's vessels that are new, and therefore they have no telltale sign, ein chayav lahachris. You're not obligated to announce them. And again, what am I going to ask? The same question. Same question I'm going to ask is, well, why does the Mishnah quote Reb Shimon ben Elazar about that? Does that mean that somebody else disagrees with that? Evidently so. Because again, if this was universally accepted, it wouldn't be just stated as Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar's opinion. It would have been stated as a halacha. Klean Puria and Chayav Lachris, or whatever, something like that, right? Evidently that this is Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar's opinion. Oh, this is Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar's opinion. Somebody disagrees. And then, again, the question is going to be, so what is the point of contention here? Seems pretty reasonable to me. If it's basically right off the shelf and there's no telltale marks, why should you be obligated to announce that? What is that referring to, right? Okay, so we're going to have to identify that in two. Okay, so by the time we're finished the Mishnah, we have a few things that we got and a few things which need some explanation. The things that we got were some general rules we picked up from the examples that the Mishnah gave. Some general rules are, it has to be lost. It can't have been placed. Hence, it has to be strewn about. It has to be something which does not have a siman, something which does not have an identifiable mark, some sort of unique something which the person could identify and thus be able to say reasonably, this is mine. Okay? Those are the two general rules that we picked up from the Mishnah. But again, for some reason, those are Divrei Rabbi Meir. We're going to have to figure out, if there's a point of contention, what is it? Then we have Rabbi Yehuda who says if something is a little odd, that itself is an identifiable mark. Okay, so who argues on that? And why do they argue? And Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says if it's new, you can keep it, you're not chayav lahachris. Why? Because it doesn't have an identifiable mark. Okay, that makes perfect sense. So who argues and why do they argue? Right? We're going to have to figure out what's going on in that Mishnah a little more. Okay? So, but that's okay because we got a long Gemara ahead of us, and the Gemara, you can bet your sweet life, is going to pick up on some of these things, and we're not alone in this, right? Right? The Gemara is going to pick up on everything that I asked and everything that we talked about. Gemara is going to pick up on all of them. Okay. Okay, ready? Now, I'm going to pause here for a second. Ideally, we just finished 1.1. That's one unit, so to speak. If I had my druthers, which I don't, but if I did, I would have that everybody in the class, we would meet again for another hour tomorrow, maybe 2 hours tomorrow, right? And we would go over this and review it. And then we'd review it again. And then we would go through all the exercises in the workbook. And we would get it really down well. And then we would pull out regular Gemaras, which I see that Alexander has one and whatever, right? Regular Gemaras, and read it inside of a regular Gemara until we got it down pat, until you knew it. Boom. That is how I would do it if we could. If we had the time, we would do it. And that's the way to do it. That is the way to do it. I'll digress by saying that one time when I first created this program, I actually was able to do this. This goes back many years. There was a fellow who, cute, he saw the advertisement for a crash course in Talmud learning skills. He signed up. He signed up because that his wife had learned in a seminary in Israel and learned Gemara in the seminary, and she had a better handle on learning Gemara than he did, and he didn't like that. So he signed up for this. So I discovered that through the course of getting to know them, I discovered that this fellow was a big guy. He was about 6'3", 260. He was a big guy. This fellow, very nice chap, lived a few blocks away from my father-in-law, Alav Shalom, in Silver Spring. So when I discovered that, I said, "Oh, right, terrific." So I was going to go visit my father-in-law, and I said, it was in the summer, long summer day. I told him, "Let's learn. We'll learn at the shul. We'll learn an hour before mincha." Great. So that's what I did. Now this course was much more intense than this. I used to meet with them 3 times a week, 2 hours a shot. So it was much more intense. Okay, so he comes, we meet, and sure enough, he's there. And then he says to me, "Oh gosh, I can't believe it. I forgot my formatted Gemara." So I said, "So? We're going to learn it in the regular Vilna Gemara." So he sheepishly says, "Well, I didn't get to that part. I know I was supposed to, and I didn't quite get there yet. And I didn't get to all the exercises." And he's sheepishly admitting that he didn't do all his homework, right? So I said, "No problem. Start right now." So he says, "But I never did that. I never read in a Vilna Gemara." So I said, "First time for everything." We pulled off 2 Gemaras off the shelf. But he did work there. I mean, we reviewed during the class time. We worked on it. He started reading, and he shocked himself that he was able to do. He read it by himself with very little in the way of my prompting, 90% of it. He was so shocked that he could do that, he blew his own socks off. He really didn't know that he could do that. And there it was, he did it, right? And I still remember, he was so excited. Like, after we finished learning, he started jumping a little bit, like it was it. And he was, big guy, and the whole building started shaking. Because he was very excited, because you can do this. You can do this. It's really, all you need to do is do it in an orderly fashion, and you can do it. Trust me, you can do it. So if you get a chance, even 10 minutes someplace along the line, just to go over it, work it through, do some of the exercises. If not in writing, but at least mentally. You do it, you chazarah it over, you get it down. Especially if you can get it all the way to the point where you can read it inside of a regular Vilna Gemara, you're really working. That's really where it's at. That's where you can do it. And it won't take as long as you think. All you need to do is get 10, 15 minutes someplace in your day, turn off the cell phone and just do it, right? You can do it. Okay, let's start Sugya 1.2, at least to get a little bit, and we're not going to, there's no way to finish it off in the next few minutes, but we're going to start it. The Gemara has an interesting question here. The Gemara says, Matzah peiros mefuzarin. You find produce, again that's fruits or produce, which are scattered. The Gemara asks a very interesting question. The Gemara says, Vikama. What does Vikama mean? And how much? How scattered is scattered? Scattered a little bit? How much is a little bit? you ever see these recipes that say a dash of something? Well, how much is a dash? Right? The person who wrote the recipe knows what they're referring to, but the reader doesn't necessarily, right? You get vague details. The Mishna is vague. Matzah peres mefuzar and scattered. Well, how scattered is that? How scattered does it have to be? So, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak says, Kav be'arba amas. Says Rabbi Yitzchak, I'll tell you the answer. It's a kav. A kav is it can be translated as a stick, but that's not, I don't know if that's what you meant. A kav is a measure. Hard to say exactly what that measure is in terms of our measurements. It seems that it's not a very big measure. It's like, let's put it this way. A kiddush cup is, let's say, about 3.5 ounces. That's called a revius. It's a revius of a lug. Okay? A lug, there are 6 lug to a kav. Okay? So multiply a kiddush cup times 4 and then times 6. Okay? It's not a huge amount. A kav be'arba amas, in 4 amas. So Rabbi Yitzchak comes in and he says, here's the magic number. You want to know how scattered? It is 1 kav of produce, that measure, in an area of 4 amas. That's the line.
That's called scattered?
That's called scattered.
Less than that?
Okay.
Or more than
Apparently, it goes like this. If it's in a smaller area than that, then it's not scattered. That's already too condensed. If it's in a larger area than that, then it's for sure scattered.
What does arba amos mean? Does that mean 4 by 4 square?
Yeah, oh, very good. We're going to talk about that also. Yes, let's assume it means 4 square amos, which means...
Well, that's 4 by 4 square is different than 4 square amos.
Right, okay.
16 square.
Right, 16, right. Let's assume it's 4 square, right? Yes, right.
What's the difference between 4 square amas and 4 by 4? What's the difference?
4 by 4 would be
16.
16 square amos.
Right.
Squared, not squared. 4 squared is 16 square.
4 squared.
Square is 16 area. The area is 16.
16 square
If
amas.
it's 4 by 4.
4 amas this way, 4 amas that way. So you have an area
4
of...
square amas would be 2 by 2.
Right, that's right. Now, so we're going to discuss this also. We'll get there. So the Gemara, and we're going to have to stop here due to the lack of time, but the Gemara asks an interesting question and gives a very interesting answer. The Gemara asks an interesting question in what is considered scattered? How scattered are we talking about? Okay? Now, it is very interesting, the reason why the Gemara asked that question. Merely the question is curious. I'll tell you why. Because if you would have asked Englander that question, I would have said, who says that it's dependent on numbers or area and amount of food or amount of produce? I would have said, look at it. Does it look like it dropped or does it look like it was placed? Right? If it looks like it dropped, who cares how much or how little it is? If it looks like it's dropped, so then it's lost. And if it looks like it was placed, again, who cares how much numbers it is? If it's placed, and therefore you shouldn't touch it. I wouldn't have asked the question at all about how much. What do you mean how much? Who says it's dependent on numbers and quantity? I would have said, look at it. Does it look placed or does it look dropped? So the mere fact that the Gemara asked the question is a curiosity. Okay? Well, the Gemara is going to pick up on this. Like I said, I'm not the first person who thought of this, right? Most of the time, if you have a reasonable question, you'll find out that you weren't the first person who thought about this. And Rabbi Yitzchak comes up with seems to be like, I don't know, pulled it out of the hat, kav in 4 amas. Was that some, I don't know, secret recipe that he knew somehow? That he somehow came up with this idea that, it's kav in 4 amas. Where did you get that from? We'll have to see. Okay? Time does not allow for us to do this, so Emir Hashem, next week, same time, same station, we will find out more about what Rabbi Yitzchak had to say about this, and why Rabbi Yitzchak said what he said, and we will find out. But the Gemara is going to, as usual, doesn't take anything sitting down, and the Gemara will always say, "Oh, really? That's interesting. All right, now let's discuss that a little bit." And the Gemara always does that. We will find that. Gentlemen, have a wonderful evening.